Well, let me welcome everybody here. What a good occasion with some incredible public servants that I stand with. Public servants from law enforcement, from the legislature, from prosecutors' offices, attorney general's office, some great advocates for women and victims of sexual and domestic violence with nonprofit organizations. Truly a bipartisan effort, and one with people and representatives from all regions of the state. And I'm very happy to be able to come today and to sign a whole series of bills that came out of good work that the Commission on Sexual and Domestic Violence have worked on over the years. In October of 2006, by Executive Order 38, I established this commission, and it was a commission, and many of the commission members are here, and they really did a great job to look at the way crimes of sexual and domestic violence are treated in Virginia and to give us recommendations for things that we can do better. The legislature has done a really good job over the last number of years in doing some creative things to deal with predators and folks who would commit these crimes, but we recognize that that's just part of the strategy, and a big part of the strategy has to be prevention and also making sure that we treat victims of these crimes in the best way possible. These crimes are horrific enough. Often people who are coming forward to report these crimes and without necessary malice, but they're made to feel more victimized by the way the process works, and that makes it difficult for some even to consider reporting. And so the idea was using the expertise of this panel and the passion of these legislators for finding solutions to create some new opportunities for prevention, but also work on our criminal justice system to make these folks who've been victimized by crimes feel like they're treated more humanely. And so the panel came up with a number of recommendations. I think there are about 27, and we still got a ways to go. I think we acted on a total of about 18 or 19 bills, some of which have been previously signed. We'll sign 11 or 12 today. But I think there are a number of recommendations the panel made that we didn't address by legislation this year, so there is more work to be done, and we recognize that standing here. But we did pass 13 bills, and the legislature also included in the budget $450,000 in additional budgetary revenue for the sexual assault crisis centers across Virginia. So the purpose for today is to sign these bills and to say thanks. I want to thank Attorney General McDonald, who is not able to be here today, but I think Marla Decker is here. Marla from the office, I want to thank you guys for your good work. My Cabinet Secretary John Marshall and the various state public safety agencies. We'll hear in a second from some folks from the state side, but just want to thank everybody for their participation. And I will comment on each of the legislators and their bills briefly as I sign the bills. Through the combined effort, picking up on the recommendations of the task force, we were able to do a couple of things, and I'll just sort of summarize quickly. We eliminated what had been a very archaic defense in the state to a statutory rape charge, where it was a complete defense to a statutory rape charge in some instances if the defendant married the victim. Most people were shocked to hear that was even law, and as it was being debated, some said, "Oh, it may be law, but it certainly has never been used." And we found a case actually that actively being prosecuted in Montgomery County where the defense was being used right as the debate was occurring. And thank goodness, I think the legislature all said, well, that needs to be eliminated. We can't have in law any notion that there's an excuse, justification, rationalization for rape. We banned what had been in some jurisdictions a sort of mandated requirement that complainants of crimes of sexual violence receive a polygraph exam before being able to press forward with their complaint. That's not required of other crime victims, should be required of those who have been victimized by crimes of sexual violence. In addition, a similar matter, we required the state to reimburse and pay for the physical evidence recovery kit in instances of sexual or domestic violence, whether or not the victim agrees to go forward and prosecute the case. There aren't other crimes where we make somebody make a decision about whether they're going to pay for evidence gathering and make them make a decision about prosecution when they're coming forward to complain about the crime. That should be the state's responsibility, and with the bill that has been passed by the legislature, it now will be. Faster reporting of protective orders. eliminating what had been a little bit of a timing glitch in protective orders as they are entered by the court, being entered into the state criminal database system so that law enforcement professionals could immediately know of the presence of those protective orders and use it to protect women and others who are the subject of those orders. Very important. Senator Deeds and others, I think Senator Deeds and Delegate Bell worked on a bill that I'll sign in a minute, requiring all law enforcement agencies, state and local, to have written policies about how they handle allegations and crimes of sexual violence. I think written policies and having standard protocol will be both good for the law enforcement perspective, but also a good thing for the victims and complainants of these crimes. And finally, and I think this is a bill that Delegate Shannon had, and I heard he was stuck in traffic, which brings to mind another topic. Yeah, I think he's going to be joining us, but he had a bill, I believe, that added stalking victims to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Fund. Stalking was not a crime that was covered by that fund, and it now is as a result of that bill. So all of those matters were dealt with in policy, as well as the budgetary support for these crisis centers. Again, more work to do. But those who are on the commission, you know, I just want to tell you, I really appreciate your work. We don't appoint commissions and then just get reports and let them sit around. When we appoint commissions, then when the work is done, we really go to work and use it as a blueprint for action. And that is the strategy of Secretary Marshall and Secretary Tavenner and our whole team, is that when we have these commissions and they make reports, we use them for action. So to you commission members, I want to thank you for working so hard on these. We have so many legislators here to thank that I think what I'll do is probably not thank them from the podium, but as I sign the bills, I'll just comment on which bills were patroned by which legislators. But I will say that this is an area where there's a great deal of bipartisan consensus. And you know, there's more areas like that than you might think. The areas where we work together are not necessarily the ones where, you know, they get all the ink, because if things go smoothly, they're not so interesting. But it is important, I think, it's an important indication of how important a priority this is, that great deal of working across the aisle, House, Senate, Democrat, Republican, executive, legislature. And I think we all felt privileged to be able to carry these bills this year and make measurable improvements in the way that Virginia responds to these crimes. Hopefully it will lead to some of the funding for prevention, and some of the other measures will lead to fewer of these crimes, but when people experience it as victims, they'll find a system that they have more confidence in and more trust in, and that will treat them more humanely, and that is the goal of our work. And with that, what I want to do is have two folks come up and say a word. Christine Hall is the head of the Action Alliance on Virginia's sexual assault and domestic violence, and played a key role in kind of keeping us all pointed in the right direction on these bills. And then Colonel Kemmler is going to come up and offer some remarks on behalf of the state police and broadly the law enforcement community who work so hard on these measures too. So I'll bring Christine up first. Christine.
Good afternoon again. I'm Christine Hall with the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. A recent study from the Virginia Department of Health estimates that over 30,000 adults are sexually assaulted each year in Virginia, and that many of them suffer in silence and in the shadows. 30,000 adults each year. That's not over a lifetime, that's each year in Virginia. And then we know many of them are not reaching out for services at crisis centers, at the hospitals, and certainly not reaching out to local law enforcement to report their crime and allow perpetrators to be held accountable. So it is extremely exciting to be here today, and as you can see, there was a ton of work that's been done over the last couple of years to strengthen Virginia's response to sexual violence. We're here today because Virginia, under Governor Kaine's leadership, has said we must and we can do better. And the laws that are put before us today will help us strengthen our response to sexual assault. We have a responsibility to treat victims with respect, fairness, and sensitivity. We need to do our part to reduce the barriers to accessing services, to reporting sexual assault to police, and effectively prosecuting these crimes. The question of the day for many of us, I'm sure, is what difference will this really make? Well, I stand before you today to say that being here today tells us and shows us the difference that this is going to make. For the last several months, actually several years, there's been statewide dialogue about sexual violence, a crime that's been shrouded in silence for way too long. And that dialogue is continuing on the local level today as law enforcement, advocates, forensic nurses, healthcare providers, and citizens abroad are trying to figure out how they can best ensure that the spirit of this law is carried out in their communities and that their system is prepared to respond and to treat victims with the fairness and the respect and the dignity that they deserve. On a practical level, what is this going to mean to victims in your community, in my community? Well, for victims who are used to being approached with suspicion and are fearful that no one is going to believe their story, it will no longer be tolerated for them to ask to prove the validity of their complaint before police pursue a thorough investigation. Victims won't have to be concerned about the affordability of a forensic exam that may cost anywhere from $800 to $2,500 before evidence is preserved and stored in order for them to make a decision to choose to report the crime or not. After hours at the emergency room and a grueling physical exam, victims can choose to go home, get a couple hours of sleep, take a shower, grab something to eat, talk with family or friends before they're forced to make a decision about whether or not they're prepared to go through with the prosecution of the offense. And lastly, but certainly not a small factor, marriage will no longer be an absolute defense for any sex crime in Virginia. Several years ago, we addressed this with crimes against adults, and this year we addressed it with a sex crime against children. So marriage is no longer an absolute defense for sex crime in Virginia. However, whether or not these statutory changes have the desired effect on the day-to-day lives of victims in our communities is ultimately up to you and to me. It's our responsibility as service providers and community members to ensure that our local practices and responses to victims carry out the vision and the spirit of these statutory changes. And finally, again, I want to thank Governor Kaine for his leadership. I want to thank the members of the Commission for their hours of work and dedication at examining this issue. And lastly, I want to thank the members of the General Assembly who looked at each of these issues critically and debated them back and forth and ultimately signed some really critical legislation that will become enacted July 1, 2008. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Christine.
It's a pleasure to represent Virginia State Police and the members of the law enforcement community of Virginia. I would like to thank the members of the Commission, the senators and delegates that patroned these bills, and thank Governor Kaine for enacting these bills into law effective on July 1st. The law enforcement community of Virginia has a responsibility to protect the citizens and to provide services to those citizens. These select pieces of legislation will assist law enforcement in doing both of those requirements. These will enhance the ability for law enforcement to investigate, to look at victims, to provide the adequate service to victims, and to put other items in place in order to protect the victims with protective orders in those. So again, we feel as a law enforcement community that these bills will give us better guidance and better avenues to protect the victims of the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. Just say one word before I move to the signing. Is, you know, I think about this signing commemoration in a way that is similar to two others we've done this year: the signing of all the bills related to the mental health package, mental health reform, and then also the signing that we did Friday of all the bills reforming the foster care system and the way we provide services to troubled children under the Comprehensive Services Act. There's quite a connection between all of these. You know, in many instances, law enforcement, you're not dealing with mental health issues. You know, if you get your bike stolen, you get vandalism, it's a bad thing, but that is not likely to lead to significant mental health challenges, and often the perpetrators are not people with significant mental health needs. But in crimes of sexual violence, it is often the case that perpetrators have very significant mental health needs, and it is certainly the case that those who are victimized by these kinds of crimes often carry a mental health burden on their own shoulders, you know, for weeks, months, or even years thereafter. So the mental health work that we did, which changed some of the standards, but put more resources into the community for treatment of people who are experiencing mental health challenges, before they become emergencies, or treatment of kids who have been removed from their homes, often get removed from their homes because of sexual abuse or other crimes that occur against them when they're young. There is a connection between these matters, and all of them together, I think, represent a real step forward for the broad mental health of the Virginia population. So this is more than just a law enforcement bill. I mean, I really do view it as a bill about improving mental health and treatment and prevention in a broad way, and in that sense it fit in very well with other initiatives that were so important this year. With that, let me come on over and sign these bills, and I'll just do quick descriptions of them as I go. As I say, I think we have 13. The first bill I'm signing is House Bill 1043. Delegate Watts, who is here, is the patron, and this is the House version of the bill, making it absolutely clear that no one is required to take a polygraph exam if they want to have their case investigated. Thank you very much. Good work on that. Next bill, Senate Bill 164, which is Senator Lucas's bill, and that is the Senate companion, also dealing with the polygraph examination, and very, very important to put that one to rest. House Bill 753 is Delegate Peace here. I don't think he was able to be here today. This is Delegate Peace's bill, HB 753. If I can find page 1, I can. Oh, you'll notice I'm not. I really have read these before I'm signing them. I'm not just signing them. Delegate Peace is the bill dealing with more prompt recording of protective orders in the criminal information system, so that crime victims can be protected immediately. It just makes it a matter of course that the orders are entered as soon as action is taken on them in the court system. Senator Obenshain, who I also do not believe is here today, Senate Bill 540. That bill is also, let's see, I think it's the same bill. Yep, dealing with the protective orders. Step. Paula Miller. Paula could not be here today. House Bill 956. Paula's bill is the bill that is making clear that let's see here. This is the bill, this is the bill making clear that the PERT kit, the physical evidence recovery kit, is paid for by the state, and that there need to be any lack of clarity about who is responsible for paying that. The victim doesn't have to do that. Senate Bill 312, I think that's the Senator Puller's version of that bill from, same bill on the Senate side, PERT kit bill. Is Todd here? Todd's not here, okay. Yeah. I saved Senator Shannon for the end, hoping he would get here, but I don't know. Maybe he's not going to. Are you here for Steve? Okay, great. This is House Bill 1395, Rob Bell's bill, and I think, Rob, this is the bill dealing with the written policies for law enforcement agencies in terms of how to handle crimes of sexual violence. Good work. Senator Deeds and Delegate Bell both have prosecutorial backgrounds, having worked as a Commonwealth's attorney and assistant Commonwealth's attorney, and so worked together on this measure for the law enforcement policies, knowing this issue very well. Jen McClellan, House Bill 597, which is a very short bill. It's the one repealing the marriage as a defense to statutory rape. And then Senate Bill 608, Senator Stolley, which is the same bill on the Senate side, repealing that. The last bill that we're not signing, I guess, because Steve isn't here, was Steve Shannon's bill dealing with adding stalking to the Criminal Victim Compensation Fund. But how about a round of applause for all these legislators? Any questions? You can feel free to come forward and question people as you will, but Christine, thanks to you. And hey, look, so we did 10 of your 27 recommendations this year, so we got more to do next year, right? Okay, we'll do it. Thanks.